global energy suppliers and consumers during the G20 oil ministers virtual conference that was held on Friday. During his intervention at the video conference hosted by Saudi Arabia, the rotating head of the G20, Pradhan reassured the grouping that India will continue to remain a global energy demand center. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take stock of the G20 oil ministers meet. Joining me on the program today are Anil Razdan, former Secretary, Energy, Ministry of Government of India, I beg your pardon, and also former Special Secretary, Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. Jayant Das Gupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO, and Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Consulting Editor of the Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Das Gupta, let me begin the program with you. Let's first talk about the highlights, really, as far as the G20 oil ministers meet was concerned, an unprecedented one. It was done over video conferencing.
I think the few important things which were more or less sealed at this meeting were first that the deal between Saudi Arabia or OPEC plus countries and Russia and its allies over a 10 million barrels per day cut, that was more or less agreed upon. The other point was that Canada, US, Mexico, Brazil, etc., the other producers of oil, will also cut their production by up to 5 million barrels per day. The third point was that, and India brought this up quite emphatically, is that there has to be a kind of a balance that, energy has to be provided at reasonable cost, and it should be affordable for the countries which consume it. And finally, that India is in favor of stabilization of the market so that the consumers also could, have a break even of their operations in terms of prices. And there could be a consumption-led demand recovery. So it has to be gradual. And of course, we are all looking at a post-COVID-19 scenario. So these are the positives. And the OPEC Plus, as you know, have already decided that there would be a cut of about 6 million barrels per day from 2022 onwards. So that will remain in place. So these are some of the positives that have that can be taken away from the meeting. The point is that because Brent crude yesterday, I think, was ruling at about $31.5 per barrel, which is fairly low. The production in the US and Canada has already gone down of its own because it just can't compete with these low prices. But from all the industry figures that have come out, the break-even point is between $40 and $50 for most oil fields. So if oil prices continue to rule around $30 to $40, companies will be forced to slow down further and also shut down many of their wells. Right. So that is something which we need to contend with. Globally, we have to have a coordinated and cohesive policy to be followed by all countries so that the producers also are not put to any hardship and they don't have to shut down.
Right. Okay. All right. So, talking about the coronavirus pandemic, talking about how the world is in lockdown, Mr. Razdan. So, how badly affected is the oil sector across the world?
The oil sector certainly got a bashing. And of course, this is the condition of countries who've got cheap oil, so to say, to produce. And it's good news in a way that oil prices have fallen for countries like India, the major consumers. We are importing almost 85% of our requirement today. But then you see the whole business has to be sustainable, as Ambassador Das Gupta also said. If these oil-producing countries cannot sustain at that level their economies, because their economies are entirely dependent on oil, and they have to be kept going also. It has to be a happy compromise. They have to realize that we can't afford those high prices today, particularly when our economy is also going to be in a strain like the global economy. And we've got a large population which is either still below poverty line or just above poverty line. It's hovering around that, maybe 30-40% of our population. So if we've got to get them on to clean energy, and particularly, as we've said, get them on to gas cylinders, to other kinds of pipe gas supply, maybe in the times to come, all this has to be affordable. Gas prices also have taken a fall. Incidentally, I think the ONGC production, though it came down marginally last year, their own production cost is about $35 to $40 itself per barrel. Now, similarly for gas prices, our gas is in difficult fields and domestic production will certainly go down, because if you have fixed a gas price at about $2.39, you can't be producing gas at $4 or $6. Now that is a very unviable proposition. But this is certainly, it's very uncertain times, but the richer nations and the producing nations, they've got to also realize that countries like India have a huge problem, and it must be a win-win situation for everybody, as the minister has also tried to push out. I heard some reports that they said the demand is going to remain steady, jump up. Yes, well, if the economy gets back on rails fast, it certainly will. But at least the first half, or the first quarter at least, of this financial year is going to be pretty bad. And I think I was listening into Dr. Fatih Birol's interview with one of our channels. And his concern also was a huge job loss in the oil industry globally if prices continue to fall. So he's obviously, you see, they're from the OECD group, essentially. In my time also, we were negotiating with them as an associate member, because we did not want to get involved as a compliant country to the Kyoto obligations, etc. The situation thereafter, of course, has changed. But they must also realize that oil cannot go to the prices it had reached, particularly for importing countries. Getting 85% of our oil is import. You have to have a nation price also, and maybe a special price. I think this is the time also we can negotiate by saying, yes, okay, we assure you this much demand, but you please keep our price band in this range. This is what we can afford. If you keep the price band at this range, then we can assure you this much demand. Otherwise, we do have a coal reserve. We can switch on to electrification in any case, because the option before the Indian homes today also is going to be that, do you use electricity for your cooking needs, or do you still stick on to gas? Because electricity reached almost every home today.
Okay, that's an aspect that we'll take up probably later on in the program, about using alternate modes of fuel. But Shubhama, talking about a special price, I think a special price has already been reached between India and Saudi and UAE. I think it's about $30 a barrel for the next, I don't remember the exact duration of time, but that special price, I believe, has already been reached. That is one. Secondly, what would be a win-win formula for both the producers and the consumers from all of this?
That's a point. I mean, win-win formula is, frankly speaking, something that the world doesn't have to offer. For the simple reason that the oil production, if the guys who are producing it cannot afford to produce it, then they will definitely have forced to shut their wells. Oil prices in some places in USA have already reached negative territory. It's just the entire storage capacity of this world has already come to full level. There's absolutely no space now to put the oil that is being pumped out anywhere. We are now, the countries are now requisitioning the very large crude carriers as places to pump in their oil. In fact, even yesterday's, Thursday's decision to cut the oil production by 10 MPD essentially means that till the end of April, the oil will be producing just as it is being produced now. And then later on, it just will be reduced to the extent that they, in any case, would have had to reduce. So the oil economy today, frankly speaking, doesn't have any formula to come out unless the world itself starts coming out of its recession. In that situation, what does it mean for India? One, first of all, the remittances that were coming from those countries, and that amount to about 4% of our GDP, has gone and will go out. And those men will be back on our shores. And that's already started. That's really big bad news for us, because that immediately means that additional number of people and additional and lower GDP. 4% is quite a bit. The second part of it is that the oil reduction definitely helps us in terms of our prices, but the low inflation that it creates, remember, it is also a problem there that it turns the terms of trade, which was turning positive for agriculture, into an adverse terms of trade. So essentially, low prices isn't really relating to something that we can win out of. For instance, we have a plan to sell HPCL. That is a massive amount of support the government would need. Today, HPCL is not possibly going to be sold because no oil company in the Middle East has money to be able to buy HPCL. If that is so, then that means a severe financial pressure for India.
BPCL probably.
BPCL, not HPCL, BPCL. This other problem is even worse, which is that the Indian economy isn't necessarily an oil-dependent one, as Mr. Razdan pointed out, but we are not at this moment in a position where low oil prices give us a boost across sectors. This is a problem, therefore, that we need to look at. That it is peculiar, but India now needs the oil companies, or rather the oil economies, to actually start becoming better. That sort of helps us. A large part of our FDI is negotiated from Middle East countries.
Right.
If these countries go down, it has a severe impact on our economy.
Sure.
So essentially, we have a very strong stake with the health of these economies. The idea that we should commit, and that's what Mr. Pradhan has said, that we should commit to the fact that we will be buying a good percentage of the oil. We are, in fact, the world's third largest buyer of oil now, is a very good message that he has given out. And yes, obviously, as a big buyer, we should dominate the price line, that what is the price that we will be asking for. But beyond that, the fact that these countries are in bad shape is really bad news for the Indian economy.
Absolutely. All right. Taking the discussion forward now, Mr. Dasgupta, I'm going to take the point that Shubho is making forward with you. If you look at the bigger picture, really, too high oil prices also are a problem, but too low oil prices also, like rightly pointed out for him, are really a problem. So what do we do in a situation like that? You spoke about $40, $50, or oil being at that rate, and that could be a middle ground. Is that where we need to start working from?
I think we need to have a kind of a consensus built up amongst the consumers, the major consuming countries, and India being the third largest, China the second one, and of course the US is also the very large producer as well as consumer at the moment. So we have to have a kind of a consensus built up amongst the consuming countries that we are prepared to pay this kind of a price, and then we have to negotiate with the producers. And because whatever solution is worked out has to be a win-win situation. It can't be a win for the consumers, because the producers will stop producing and the prices will go up and there would be shortages affecting the economies all around. So we have to have a negotiated settlement on this. And the time for the companies, the producers, is to be transparent about their costs, because they have been saying that they can't function for very long at these low prices, only for a short period. So there has to be transparency, and we have to, because they also have raised capital from banks, from other financial institutions to run their companies. So those are also burdens which will have to be taken into account. Now, the point that I wanted to make specially is that, of course, Mr. Razdan has already said that we are importing about 85% of our requirements. And if you look at the total picture of oil plus gas plus coal, we are importing about 46% of our requirements at the moment. And this is likely to go up to about 53% according to projections by 2030. So we will continue to import more and more. And of course, coal we can perhaps substitute, but our oil and gas will go up. Gas, there are some positive indications that coal bed methane, coal mine methane, and then coal gasification, and finally biodigesters can possibly provide some kind of local generation of gas which can reduce our burden of imports. But oil dependence will continue to remain, especially for our transport sector, and the other requirements which industries have of oil. So we have to assure that we will continue to be one of the top three. If not, we are supposed to move up to the second place in a few years' time in terms of oil consumption. So, and by 2035, there is another projection that 18% of the rise of global, energy will be because of India. So we will continue to have that dominant position in terms of a consumer, and we can leverage that in pushing others to come to an agreement. Because from the other side also, if you look at it, if they refuse to agree on a reasonable price, they will also be put out of business.
Sure. Okay. Yes. All right, Mr. Razdan, let's talk about another aspect altogether now. What about alternate modes of fuel and energy?
Frank, I just wanted to just pitch in one point here, or what Ambassador said, and that is, you see, shale, we are not considering the US pressure that will come on account of shale, because I think what the traditional oil producers have been trying to do also is probably to push out shale and see how low they can go down. But I think the US will not sit silent in all this, and they might also try and pitch the price a little higher, which suits their shale production. So this other element will also be coming into the picture. And the other point is that how soon the economies can get off the block, because post-COVID-19, today we are in a situation where again we'll be on a new starting block and seeing how soon the economies can take off. And unless we are in a position by that time to get off the starting blocks fast and in a meaningful way, we will not be able to buy that much imported commodities. Yes, now please go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, talking about a new starting block, is it time that we look seriously at our renewables and the other alternate fuels as well? Because since we are going to be starting afresh, why not from there as well?
Quite right. That maybe it's a new paradigm that we've got to look at today in many aspects. See, it will be whether it be labor intensive, maybe less transport, less moving around. The whole way the world is going to look at it's through another prism, probably. But as you said, the alternatives, yes. Renewables already we are pushing to a point. We shall also probably need to put pressure on, at the end use. Unless the end use consumption comes down to suit renewable generation, that will be a problem. And in India, we have a problem also of balancing power. Now, the exercise which we had a week back on the power shut off and shut on, now the whole situation could be brought under control because of hydro, that quick ramping up, etc. Now, hydro, we must try and encourage pumped hydro also, particularly. We've got to revisit those areas which we had forgotten for a while. Now, solar and wind, yes, wind, we were a strong manufacturing country, but we have, unfortunately, that industry is dying out. We've got to attend to that urgently. As far as solar is concerned, yes, we have to marry it with indigenous manufacture. Imports of all solar equipment cannot carry on indefinitely or beyond a time. And the other point is alternative fuels. Yes, we are, I think the methanol mission needs to be given a boost also. There is talk, in fact, of some technology. Just yesterday, somebody had brought to me on sugarcane It's pressed mud, it's called, and getting gas out of it. With such technologies, have to see cellulosic alcohol and things like that. But we've got to relook at technologies and see how we can fit into the new world order that is going to start.
Right.
It's like the post-World War II. It's going to be an era of reconstruction, and we need to start investing quickly in the right places. There's, of course, a lot of pressure on the government to give cash grants to people, but I think my personal view is that it has to be job-oriented. You've got to give people employment quickly, settle new jobs for them, and make them start on new starting blocks.
Okay, all right. Shubham, I'm going to go back to the point that Mr. Pradhan was making at the G20 yesterday. You know, he was talking, clearly it was a message that was sent out to our friends in West Asia as well, because, you know, over the last 6 years, we've seen an incremental improvement in the bilateral relationship between India and the Middle Eastern countries. So, you know, it's also important for us to keep that relationship going at some level.
Absolutely. In fact, I would take a contraposition on the import issue to say that, you know, we today don't really need to be hassled about the fact that we are importing so much of oil. The Indian economy today is in a position where it can nicely balance the import requirement. And because of that, we can easily handle not only the imports, but it creates a huge leg up for us, just as what you're saying, in terms of the ability that we get to tap into the resources of these countries in the Middle East. And that is what Mr. Pradhan was talking about, that India's connections with these countries have become much more stronger at several levels. And that is something not just at the economic, but also the political level. So it is something that India is therefore very, very careful to nurture. For instance, in natural gas, we are actually sort of determining which way the natural gas investments will happen, both in Iran as well as in Qatar. Because as India moves more towards natural gas, we are planning to move towards about 15% from 6% as we have right now. That would actually determine the space of natural gas investments in the rest of the world. So yes, these are something that we now need to look at, and the paradigm has definitely shifted in terms of our need to think of it that whether we can afford the imports. There's no question about that. We really are there. The second part is that because we have, as Mr. Razdan and Mr. Razdan was pointing out, the ability to go in for renewable energy, we can use that as a trump card to solidify our presence in the energy matrix. In fact, we've already done that, and that is considerably significant because we are the largest mover on the renewable energy space. So overall, it is giving us a much larger menu of options which we never had earlier, and it is time to use this pandemic to make that position absolutely strong. Coming out of it, the starting block Mr. Azavan is talking about is something that we need to look at. Yes, that we need to right now determine which way the demand and the supply position of these energy matrix, of these energy sources pan out.
Right. Okay, time to get closing comments now from all my guests with the best way forward. I'm going to ask you to be brief because we've got limited time on the program. Starting first with you, Mr. Das Gupta.
I think this is kind of a watershed moment since World War II, and things will not be the same again. We have to look at new ways of solving problems. There will be new problems, and we have to be innovative, and at the international level, we have to be cooperative. Without international cooperation, we will not be able to break through this impasse and make progress.
Okay, all right, Mr. Razdan.
I tend to agree with that I think this new era which is going to start, it is a new start. That should be to our advantage. We should try and pitch in as a major consumer is our advantage. And we should use our workforce. For one, we've got all the missions in place. Now is the time to activate, motivate our population towards a new industrial or an occupational or employment revolution, and probably relook at agriculture. The way we've been looking at agriculture, it's been reduced to penury. We must look upon it as a business where people can get proper wage and there's efficiency and there's proper marketing and production. So I think that's the way to go about it. It's a whole new, hopefully a new world, unfortunately out of COVID-19. But yes, we'll have to look at the world as a new world, as a brave new world.
That's the reality at the end of the day. So that's how we need to look at it, and that's how we need to go forward. And close the show for us, Shubhamai, with your concluding remarks.
I'm slightly worried about the fact that some of the Middle East nations might slip back into trouble. And if that is so, then we will need to be slightly less sanguine about what happens. Everything will not be positive. So we will basically be a very, very large determinant of what happens in that part of the world. And that's something that in the future days we'll get to know. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Of course, it looks like a challenging time ahead, and something that we need to be concerned about, something that we need to look at with new insights and with new eyes as well, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you so much to all my guests for joining me.